Okay, so it's time to finally start to get understanding the events, delegates, and lambda's expression. I've been working on lambda's expression and link, and it seems like they have a pretty deep roots into the delegates. And delegates, then again, to understand delegates, I have to understand the events and the event handlers. So I am taking this course, and these are my notes that I'm gathering. So C# events, delegates, and lambdas is the topic of the course. It's a plural side course by Dan Whalen, and I'm going to be learning about the role of events, delegates, and event handlers. I will be learning how to create delegates, events, and event args, handling the events, and then finally lambdas, and working with the two that are built into the framework, such as action and func. I don't know nothing about this. So here's a little overview of like a picture of, you know, events, the event tracer, event handler, and a delegate being a pipeline and glue that glues these two together. Without the delegate, obviously it wouldn't work. And it also passes the event args. So the first thing is the role of events. So the event, the simplest example of the event is like a button click event, which I used a million times. Then some other action, like a drop down list, for example, on drop down item changed. And then something that I never worked with before is custom event that is raised by in our object when something happens. For example, order being placed, start shipping, etc. So event is a notification in our example through speech, and a software example through user clicking, doing something, some kind of event, clicking, selecting. It is a way to trigger notifications from end users or from objects. So another way to do it is from objects. When something happens in an object, to raise an event. Once again, I've never done that before. I've done a million times with button click and any other UI events. Objects that raise events don't need to explicitly know about the object that will handle the event. So event raiser, which I mean the object that raises the event, doesn't need to know anything about the event handler. Good example here, and how I used to work it in ASP.NET with the web forms. Instead of having each button have its own event handler, which would copy, there'd be a lot more code. I would have the whole form, all the buttons would be wired to one event handler, and they would just send an argument. I had no idea I was doing this to delegate, but it would send an argument basically saying what button it is by the I believe it was the ID maybe of the control that I would send, and then I would know, okay, this was the submit button, and do this and do this. So I kind of had everything in one place. Objects that raise events don't need to, okay, it is also important to pass some event data, which I just said. In our case, like with this button, it was an ID, and in the case of object, we can pass several things in our event arguments, such as how much it costs, what it is, etc., etc. So what is the role of delegates in this whole schema? So without delegates, we wouldn't be able to push data from point A, which is event tracer, to point B, which is the event handler. So the event uses delegate to pass the data to event handler. So delegates are pipeline. Delegate is a type of special class often called function pointer. Well, it's called a function pointer because Well, obviously because this is a event handler is a function, so we point our delegate through the pipeline into the event handler. So it's a special type that has a method or function as its parameter, right? So that would be a delegate. It's a glue pipeline between an event and event handler, and every delegate, or the ones that we're going to be using, is going to have a multicast delegate base class. And the event handlers, finally, which are on the other end of our events, is a method that is responsible for receiving and processing data from a delegate. So delegate passes this data, and then event handler does something with it. It normally receives two parameters, sender and event args. There it is, sender and event args, which I've seen a million times. This is for onClick. Event args is responsible for encapsulating event data. So this takes some data from the event container. And we can also create a custom event args object. Something else other than event args, I suppose. So quick example here, we have Windows and web application. Windows application has a basic form. So in order to raise the event, we would double click submit button, and here's our event handler. We can see it. We can see our event, right here. It's a click event. But what we don't see, and what's hidden and confusing a lot of times, is we don't see the event handler, the delegate, which is in a designer, and this is what event handler looks like for submit button. It takes the event, which is a click, uses plus and equal, and then it says new system.event handler, and passes it to submit_click function. Submit button_click function. So parameter is the function name, and this is the actual delegate. In a web forms application, and this is a old type of web forms, where we still use these web controls, which are not really being used anymore in MVC. Very similarly, in a code behind, we'll have event handler. It looks almost identical to the event handler that we have here in a Windows form. And the idea when they created the web forms is to mimic the development environment of the actual Windows forms. But we don't have the designer doesn't hold the actual delegate. Instead, this is added to the control itself, which ASP.NET on the server side translates into the delegate. So it kind of creates it based on this. When this goes over to the server, when server reads this on click, then it takes this and makes it into something like this, which was made to simplify things. I can't remember in version 1.1 if the delegate was actually included in the form designer, because the 1.1 looked a little bit different. It actually had a lot of server generated code that held a lot of other things, but this may be 2.0 and up, but I can't remember, so I won't speculate. So that's basically the delegates, how they're used in our both web and Windows UI.